This is Krista Umgelter, and we are graduating from yesterday's 2-ingredient recipe, which was toasted sesame honey crunch, to today's 3-ingredient recipe, which is maple syrup covered coconut chips. And this recipe is just as easy as the other ones. You're going to love it, and you actually have a choice for your 3rd ingredient, which also gives you 2 varieties to test out. So let's get started. I have my coconut chips. I have 2 different types. I have one here that is not organic, and I actually like this one because the chips, the coconut is very thick and hard, so it gives a slightly different texture and a slightly different result from the coconut chips that are sold for baking in the stores. They're both good, it just depends what I'm going to be using them for. And coconut doesn't necessarily need to be organic in order to be healthy, so that is one area that I am not stringent on buying organic. So I have poured in my coconut chips. I have used the whole bag because I like to prepare the whole bag, and it is 7 ounces. And I'm going to need about 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. And as you'll see, my maple syrup is very dark, and I don't really mind the color of my maple syrup. Maple syrup is a different color based on the grade and based on the time of season that the sap is running. When the maple syrup starts to run in early February, the color is really light, and that gives a very light amber color. And as the season and the sap continues to run, it becomes darker. And the darker the quality, the higher the antioxidants and the stronger the flavor. And because you're using this on coconut chips, the flavor, a stronger flavor could be desirable. If you don't like anything maple, then you probably don't want to be doing this recipe. But it's 2 ingredients, so here I am. I'm just kind of mixing these together. And I'll give you some interesting information about maple syrup and coconut while I'm doing this. Maple syrup's glycemic index is only 54, which is quite good. It can be good for circulation, and it's also good for digestive problems. And it may be because it feeds certain types of bacteria while not feeding others. It takes about 40 to 45 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup, which is fairly huge difference. And no matter what grade you're getting, the sugar content and the density of the maple syrup are the same. So you can buy a lower grade and not have to worry if the glycemic index is different. They don't refine maple syrup, it's just boiled down. And a long time ago, the Native Americans would allow the maple sap to freeze, and they would remove the ice and they would be left with the syrup. So that was a different technique that they used to do it. But today it's boiled down in sugar houses, and the maple trees are predominantly in Canada and in the northeast of America. And coconut has 5 grams of fiber per ounce of coconut meat, which is huge. And if you are on a ketogenic diet, and a ketogenic diet is not at all the same thing as ketoacidosis, which is actually a serious medical condition. But the ketone diet makes use of certain types of fats for energy, which can be more efficient than glucose sugar energy. And so 1/3 cup of coconut meat is equal to 1 tablespoon of coconut oil. So if you're looking for the translation of that, that is where it's at. And it also has a high amount of fiber, a high amount of protein, which can be very beneficial as well. I'm all done. I've mixed it all up. I'm looking for basically a glaze. I want all of the chips to be evenly coated and distributed. And they look pretty good. And I usually use my square pan, and I'm going to use this today, but I'm going to use it for my cinnamon coated one. But I just bought a silicone mat yesterday, and I made some sugar-free coconut macaroon cookies, and I loved the result on this mat, and so I wondered what would happen if I baked the chips on it. So that is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to put these on here and I'm going to test it out and find out how the result is. And I'm going to spread them out evenly. My oven is going to be no higher than 200 degrees because I want the coconut chips to toast and become hard chips, but I don't want them to become brown. If you brown your coconut chips and your coconut flakes with maple on them and they become toasted brown, you're gonna not have any flavor from the sugar, which defeats the purpose of this. So if you want the sugar coconut taste, you don't want them to turn brown. You want them just to dry out and become hard and crunchy. That's kind of the goal. If you just want that toasted coconut, then don't bother to put the sugar on it. I am a big fanatic for keeping sugar extremely low to almost zero in the diet, and so I'm very careful about where I use it, and if there is sugar in something, I want it to pay its benefits so that I'm getting the sweetness out of it rather than it being masked by a toasted flavor. So I'm going to put these in the oven right now, and then I'm going to do another option. I'm going to take these coconut chips right here and I'm going to show you what to do for the alternatives, which are adding organic cinnamon powder, adding cocoa nibs, or carob powder on them, which will make it a 3-ingredient recipe, but it will alter the outcome significantly, and you can use these different alternatives for different health benefits. So I'm going to stir this up, and while I'm stirring this up, it was the same. It was a 6-ounce bag of coconut, and I added 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, and I'm just going to stir this up again, and I'll get back to telling you a little bit more about what coconut can do for you. And coconut is a medium chain fatty acid, and it doesn't require any enzymes for your system to be able to use it, and it does produce ketone energy, and ketone energy will go directly into being used for organ energy for the heart and other organs without the body's need to break it down with enzymes, convert it, or do anything. So 50% of the energy from medium chain fatty acids, those in coconut oil and palm oil, are immediately usable by your body, which can be a great benefit for a lot of different conditions. And the other 50% of the ketone energy from coconut oil and palm oil will be converted in the liver into ketone energy. The ketone diet is very beneficial for certain mental conditions because the energy source of fats is very different from that of glucose, because for sugar energy it needs to be a glucose plus an insulin, and for fat energy it enters the cell in the same exact way, in the same pathway, but the cells use it entirely differently. My coconut is coated and it's got that satin sheen on it, and I'm going to use organic cinnamon powder. And I always use the canning jars. I love the canning jars because they have these airtight lids, so I don't ever have to worry about insects or bugs. It's very easy to organize them. I always label my ball jars with masking tape because that way I know what is actually in there, so I don't have to guess. I can look at it with a quick glance. I also use my jars for beverages because it can handle hot beverages as well as cold things. I can put them in the freezer or in the refrigerator, and I have all the different sizes, and I've chosen the wide lid jar so that no matter what my jar size is, all the lids are the same, which is great planning, and it's super efficient. All the lids fit all the jars that I have. So cinnamon is an interesting spice. It has a lot of properties for the health. It is warming and stimulating. It's great for the digestion. It is good for nausea, vomiting, gas, diarrhea. It is good for indigestion. Easy to work with, and a lot of people really like it. I just eyeball it. I don't really use recipes. So I'm put it in, and I'm gonna mix it around, and I want every flake to be coated with the cinnamon powder, so I may need to add a little bit more. I want them all to be evenly coated with this powder. And cinnamon has other benefits, but it's important to understand that cinnamon comes from the inner bark of a tree, and different varieties of cinnamon bark are creating different effects in the body. I'm going to add a little bit more. And there's two different types of cinnamon, and I like to categorize them as the more expensive cinnamon or the less expensive cinnamon. And the least expensive has a phytochemical in it called Coumarin, and you've probably heard of Coumarin drugs. And the Coumarin in cinnamon is not at all the same thing as the Coumarin in the pharmaceutical drugs. They are entirely different. And the Coumarin in cinnamon has a great ability to break down extracellular fluids, which can be very beneficial for edema and fluid retention type conditions that are related to extracellular fluid. And the more expensive one, which is often called Cassia, oh no, not Cassia, it's true cinnamon or Ceylon cinnamon, like Ceylon tea. Those two are more expensive, and those two types are good for blood sugar and cholesterol. And so if you have a blood sugar condition or want to maximize your insulin use in your body, you would be more apt to go after the more expensive types of True and Ceylon. And the less expensive are the Vietnamese, the Burmanii, and the Cassia types. And you might be concerned that Coumarin is going to affect vitamin K or any types of drugs that you're on. And the Coumarin in cinnamon has absolutely no effect on vitamin K nor on warfarin drugs. So I have finished with this, and you'll see that it is very much coated with the cinnamon, and it's evenly distributed. And I'm going to put that in my pan. This is the usual one that I use. So I'm going to put it all in here. And as you'll notice, I have very little cleanup to do. I use the same mixing bowl for both. And if you like this is going to be a little bit spicy. If you want to add another kick to it, you could add pepper. I've never done that, but you could add fresh black ground pepper. And if you're thinking that's kind of gross, you can imagine that chai tea has black pepper in it, and it has a nice effect on it. Or you can also add some salt to this, and that would create a different element. Some of the finest foods always go after stimulating different parts of the body in the mouth with different flavors. So you're dealing with salty and sour and sweet and bitter and pungent, and combining those in just the right level can create incredible results. So I'm done with this. They're going to go in the oven under 200 degrees, and they're going to sit and dry for about an hour. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to come back when this is done, and I'm going to show you what I do then. And your other options, in addition to cinnamon, are also cocoa nibs, and I use these. I have no benefit in these, but they happen to be the least expensive organic, and I have not noticed a big difference in flavor or outcomes with cocoa. And cocoa is a great bitter. It has high fat, no sugar, and cocoa is very bitter, but it also has a caffeine in it called theobromine. And theobromine is a blood vessel dilator, is good for certain respiratory conditions as far as asthma and other things, and you may benefit from them. The raw cocoa nibs are extremely bitter, and you will find that if you taste them when they're raw, which I suggest you do because it's important, and then once they're toasted, you will notice that the really crude, harsh taste of the raw cocoa nibs is very much softer and much smoother after it's been in the oven and has been toasted. So cocoa nibs are a bitter, and they also stimulate the liver to produce more bile, which can be a great benefit for a lot of people, as well as stimulating the digestion system. And if you're using these, I would suggest giving a grind of salt on top. Salting anything that's bitter will soften your bitter flavor a little bit. And the raw cocoa nibs are quite big chunks, and I prefer to grind them down. I use a hand mill coffee grinder, and I adjust it so that the grind on them is very, very irregular. It gives me some bigger chunks, and it gives me some powder, and it gives me a whole range of things which create a nice texture, and the outcome is very different from using the big chunks, and it also sticks to the maple syrup on the coconut much easier when it's in an irregular. You can also use a mortar and pestle. I prefer to use my coffee grinder for it. In fact, I actually bought this for coffee, but I thought that the coffee grinding results were so horrible that I've never used it for coffee. But I use it for spices, I use it for cloves, I use it for cocoa nibs and allspice or anything else that I'm doing. So I love this thing. I use it all the time for my cocoa nibs to give a very unique dynamic aspect to it. The other option you can use, cocoa and chocolate is very high in oxalates. And oxalates are very, very poor decisions for people with kidney disorders, joint pain and joint problems, and a lot of people with autoimmune disease, ADD, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorders are very, very sensitive to oxalates, and those do need to be removed from the diet entirely. So if you are oxalate sensitive, you do not want to do cocoa nibs. But you have the option of using carob powder. Now I have tried this, and I thought the result was mediocre. For me, that's just my personal taste. But because I preferred the cocoa nibs. But carob powder has huge benefits over the chocolate, and I definitely recommend it. Carob powder raw has a different taste than when it's cooked. Once it's been subject to an oven and a heated temperature, it does change the results of the carob, which can be great for a lot of people because it gives it that deeper, more robust, chocolatey type of aroma and flavor. Carob powder is from a bean. Chocolate is actually a seed pod, it's a fruit. But carob is actually a bean, and it grows off of a tree. And the carob powder is very high in starch. It has no fat, and it has no oxalates and no caffeine. So you are dealing with an alternative to chocolate with a similar flavor that will create very, very different results in your body. If you're sensitive to caffeine late in the evening but like something in the evening to snack on, carob would probably be your better alternative. However, because carob is a bean, it is related to the pea family, the Fabaceae family. If you are sensitive to alfalfa, peas, or beans, you may not be able to tolerate carob. It might be problematic for your body. So that pretty much sums it up. I am going to have all of this information online in the article on the blog post. So I'm going to get these in the oven, and I will come back and we will see what happens with my oven baked chips on the silicone mat, because I am very curious to see how that turns out. Okay, I'm back, and these were in the oven for an hour, 60 minutes. I typically turn off the oven and I allow them to cool, because when these are hot, the coconut is very flexible and soft, and you will need to allow your coconut to cool off before it becomes very hard and you can hear it snap. I usually use a nonstick pan. That's what I always used before, and here's the result with the cinnamon. As you can see, it's white with a lot of darkened brown cinnamon on top. It is not toasted. It is crunchy dry, And underneath the cinnamon, it's going to look like this. It's going to be white. And as you can see, it's going to be very crunchy. And my analysis of my silicone mat is that I really like it. What I noticed is that it cooks, the heat distribution is different, and it's giving me pieces of coconut that are far more attached in wafers than what happens when I cook them in a metal pan. So I will definitely do this in the future. As you can see, it's they're bigger chunks, which could be very desirable for a lot of things. So I will put these away in a jar, and I keep them in the refrigerator, whatever's left over, whatever is not eaten after they've cooled. And they will keep in the refrigerator in a jar for as long as you want them there. And I will put them on different types of food to accent flavors. I won't give you any ideas because I don't want to ruin your creativity. I do use these for making chocolate bark. So if I'm making chocolate bark and I want coconut in it, I will make a whole batch of coconut chocolate bark. So we finished with today's coconut chips recipe, and I hope you enjoy it.